All right, so I don't want to waste too much of your time as we jump into this. Just as a quick reminder, what we're working on is the crafting window right here. We're going to end up making it so we can select our buttons and populate a list here. And moving forward, this will enable us to select a button here and populate our info box here. But for now, this is what we're working on. So let's just go ahead and pick up where we left off from the last video. Today's episode and others just like it are brought to you by the patrons listed on the screen. If you'd like to support the channel in future development, then consider visiting my Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can receive various benefits such as early access to my videos, project downloads, as well as personalized support. You may also want to consider joining the community by joining my Discord server, where you can receive help from me as well as the community. So come on over and be a part of the conversation. All right, one last thing, at least for now, that I want to get done while we're in here is let's go ahead and create a new event dispatcher. So I'm going to call this one item pressed, and we're going to essentially call this, first let's go ahead and add a parameter. I'm going to call this parameter craftable item, and I'm going to change this to be BP craftable item soft reference. All right, so let's go ahead and compile it so we have that in here. So now what we're going to do, if we take the craft button, just highlight it, we come down here to on clicked, hit the plus button. It's going to give us the event for on click. And when that's done, I'm going to drag out item pressed. We're going to make a call to it, plug it in. So now every time that button is pressed, it's going to call this dispatcher right here. So anything that is bound to it will get triggered. So I'm going to take the craftable item and just plug it straight in there. So now this item, you'll see when we actually implement the item pressed, this is already been cast. So now it is stored in memory. So from here, we won't have to do this again from this point on. We're passing this through. We're passing this memory address through. So it's going to go through and we'll be able to just do the resolved. And now at any point, even within the same function, if we resolve anywhere in here after the construct, after this is loaded, this is all we have to do with this asset for now. It's only when it no longer needs it and it deletes it that you will have to do this again. But it knows how long you need it in memory for, so it'll keep it from this point forward until this particular slot. Once the slot is destroyed, it will destroy this variable. Okay, so go ahead and compile it. So now we have that all set up. And before we jump back into the crafting window, go ahead and select the craftable item variable, and we do want to expose this. So instance editable, expose it on spawn, and I'm going to give it a category of crafting slot. So let's go ahead and jump back into the crafting window. All right, back in here, you're going to see that variable not there. So right click on our create widget node and go refresh nodes, plug this into the body. So now we need to take this BP craftable item and pass it into there just like so. Now with this, with every single slot that we're creating, now that event dispatcher that we had, we need to bind to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and go bind event to item pressed. All right, so now every single one of these that are created in this loop will have its own instance of this bind event in here. So let's go ahead and drag off of this, create event, and where we're actually going to, the object, we're not going to bind it to the crafting window. What we're actually going to do is, because we have access to the primary HUD, this is going to make a little bit more sense for us. We're just going to, because we have this reference, we're going to bind it to the actual crafting window itself, or the crafting info window. I'm sorry, not the crafting window, the info window, because that's what we're going to be doing. So if we come back into the primary HUD, and actually let's go to the crafting info window. Let's open up the crafting info window, and I'm just going to jump over into the graph. And for this, I'm going to create a function and call this update craftable info. Now it's important that we create where we match the signature of that event dispatcher. So if you remember, what we are passing through the event dispatcher is the craftable item, and that is of type BP craftable item soft reference. All right, so now if we compile it, this is here. We will come back and hit this, and just to make sure, we're going to set the at to do elsewhere, but I'm going to go to do build function. All right, so now with that, let's go ahead and head back into the crafting window. All right, so now if we take our primary HUD, let's get that, and then just drag off and go crafting info window. We don't want the box, we want the actual window. Now we could take this and plug that into there, and with that plugged in, we should be able to drop down, and you'll see, because it matched the signature, if you didn't match the signature properly, you won't see it here. But update craftable info, there we go. So now we got our event bound up in there. So remember, if you hit refresh before you update this. When you create the event, you're going to get an error saying it's not right. So you always, whenever you're binding to an event, make sure you do it before you compile. Now that we've got that bound up, let's grab our item box again. And now let's go ahead and add child to wrap box. And what we need to add is this slot. So just go ahead and drag it and put it in there. Now this is important right here. What we're going to do is we're going to right click and I'm going to go do once. We don't want the multi input. We want just do once, and then just go ahead and plug that in here. And the one thing we want to do is I'm going to create a local variable, L_first craftable item. I'm going to make it BP craftable item soft reference. Let's go ahead and compile it. So what I want to do is I want to set this, right? So I did a do once because we only want the first item in here, right? So whenever this is ran, it's only going to, this loop, it's only going to do this function once. We're not going to reset it because every time this gets called and updated and this loop runs, it'll automatically reset this do once and it will only give us the first craftable item, the first one that we pass through here. So I'm just going to drag some reroute nodes up here, and then I'm just going to take this and plug it into the set right there. And there we go. So this will ever only be set once per function call. And then if we come over here to the completed, we can hook in our return node. And what we're going to return is our first craftable item local variable. And that should about do it. But remember, we got to update this. So I'm going to add another comment and at to do, create the definition, just like that. So go ahead and compile it and save it. So now we should have two things in here that we got to go back and redo. So let's jump into this first one here and let's go create the get craftable items on the player. So let's jump in there and take care of that. So jump over to your first person character. So let's go ahead and jump over to the interfaces, crafting, because I gave it the category of crafting, and get craftable items. Now with the function open up, this is a lot what we're going to do when we did the get craftable categories, is now we need to go into the crafting component and implement a function over in there. So let's go ahead and jump over now to the AC crafting, and in here let's go ahead and create a new function, call this get craftable items by category. And with this we need a couple inputs. This first one, I'm going to call this one item category. It needs to be a single type, and this is already set to item category type. So the second one, I'm going to go bench. This one as well needs to be single, and this one needs to be of type eCraft benches. So now in here, let's go ahead and grab our craftable items master list. This is going to be really similar to the categories one, and I was trying to find a way to make this to where I can make it a dual use function, and you can by adding extra inputs in here. Then it just makes the function large and in charge, but most of this is going to be exactly the same. I just chose to do this in a separate one. If you decide you want to try to combine the functions, then you can. I'm not going to worry about that at this point. So add in a for each loop and drag in the pin here. We're going to run through the list of names here. And again, we want the variable. We're going to get the values, and then we want to get a copy, don't need a reference, from this index, run a branch, plug it into the get. And if this is true, now let's get data table row, and the row we want to get from the data table craftable items is the name being passed through right here. Drag off the out row and break the struct. And with that, let's grab the item category that is being dropped in here. And actually, I'm going to take the equal here, equal, plug that in. It doesn't really matter which way you pin it in, to be honest. I'm going to drag off of here and I'm going to go and. We got to meet two conditions on this one. So does the item category match? In other words, everything that we're looping through here, they have to be the same category, right? Because we're getting the items that belong to a particular category. So we only want the items that are within this category here. So they got to be equal. And is the craft bench equal to bench, the incoming parameter bench, and like we did before, or this is equal to player. Okay, and then plug this or into the other end of the branch. So both of these conditions have to be true. Either they have to equal the bench or the player right here, or the player, and it has to equal the category. Once that's true, let's go ahead and run a branch, row found. And if this condition was met and is true, we need to create a local variable. Call this one L_craftable items of type craftable item, soft references, and make sure it's an array. Drag that out here. Let's get it. And then we're just going to add to the array in the true branch. And then the item we're going to add is right here, the craftable item class. Just plug that in. So now we need to return this craftable item. So select the function and we need to give it a output value of craftable items, and then drag it over here into the completed. The type of the output needs to be of type craftable item soft reference, and it needs to be an array. And then just plug in our local variable right there. And like I said, ultimately this is the same as we did with the craftable categories. And the way I see that you could really probably make this a little bit more reusable is right here from the for loop, this value, this branch, and this data table, you can collapse this into a function, a private function that you can use within here. So really all you're saving is this, because right here we're utilizing this information a little bit differently. So on the output of that private function, you would just have an out row coming out here, and then you just break it on the outside of the function. So that's why I really didn't do it. It really didn't save that much. I mean, a lot of it's the same, and really you could probably even go from within here, this key, but you're not really collapsing that much to a function. So that's why I didn't worry about it, but you can if that's something you want to do. You should try to reuse functionality and save yourself time and not have to retype everything. But this was small enough that it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure you compile it and save it, and let's jump back into the crafting window. And what I meant to say was let's jump back to the player character. Now, one thing I didn't do on camera was I set this function to be a pure node. So set as pure. You don't have to. I set it as pure node, but I didn't think about it till after I hit stop the section of recording. So I can go back and show you how to do that if you want, but you know how to do that. So let's go craftable items by category. Okay, and then just plug in the item category there, the bench there, and then the craftable items, plug it into the output right there. And there we go. So go ahead and compile and save your player character. Now I believe we can head back to the crafting window. So there we go. We've got this all set up now. This crafting items interface call should be all taken care of now. So now we can delete that comment there. So the next one we have is this definition right here that we got to create for the crafting info window. You know what? We're not even going to set that up right now. We're going to leave this because we're not doing the crafting info window in this one. So we're going to just go ahead and leave that. And this will work just fine without it. Even if it calls it, when we test it and we call it, doesn't matter. It's just going to send the call out. Doesn't matter if it's there or not. It doesn't really care. The call doesn't care if anybody actually responds to the call. So let's go ahead and save it. And then I believe we were in the update category button. So that means if we head back here, the update craftable items, that's what we just did. That's virtually done. Now make sure you save your at to do in here, because you're going to end up having to come back and do this later when we do the info window, but that should be done now. So now if we can go ahead and delete the to do set update craftable items. And then I believe that leaves us done in this categories buttons. Now, if we go back into update categories, which is the road that led us here. So we've got this. I didn't write the comment there telling us to go back. I just went back, did it. So if you create a comment, go ahead and delete that there, but that should be it for this one. I don't think we have anything else in here. Nope, this one looks clean. So now go back up a step where we're at in the primary HUD, and now we can go ahead and we can call that function. So from here, go update, compile it first, and then go update categories and run it on the is valid, and the bench we want to run is bench. So technically now we can run this project and everything should be fine. The only problem is we haven't actually set any items that the system knows about for craftable items, right? And then even with that, if you remember, we created that map and we didn't populate that map with any information. But even if we did, the player still doesn't know anything in there, right? So let's go ahead and get all that set up now. Jump on over to your crafting component, and on the event graph of your crafting component, let's go ahead and type get data table, and we want the data table row names. All right, and we're going to get our DT craftable items. So what this one's going to do is this is going to get us every single name of every single item that is within our data table, and it's going to put it into a name. Well, that is handy because we're going to take this craftable item master list map, and now we're going to go add. Make sure you select the add from the map, not the operator. Select that. And inside of a for each loop, we're going to add each individual item in there. Okay. So now we're doing this. We're going to set everything to false. So even though we're loading everything into this master list, everything is false. All right. So now we need to be able to create a way to know which items we want to start with, because you know, you could start the game where the player doesn't know anything, but then you have to take that into consideration when you're starting, that the player doesn't know anything. And so you have to make things discoverable and let them learn. But for me, for my game, I think there's going to be a few things I want to start with. And you could do this with other things like your items, right? If you want the player to start with certain items, it's just kind of the same logic. It's not going to go one-to-one, but it's generally the same logic is what we're going to do here. Okay. So with that, I'm going to create a new variable and we'll call this one starting learned recipes. Now we need to make sure that with this, that we don't update this array, and this is going to be an array. We don't want to update this array in your actual component, right? So I'm going to create a little comment here that says not to do that, right? So this is a list of items that you wish to start the game with. Update from the player, not in the original blueprint. You could put them in here, but then everything you attach this component to, if you so choose, is going to start with the exact same items. You can do this to where even if you're creating multiplayer, if you're doing a multiplayer game, you could do it to where you randomly select which items or which recipes they start with, things like that. So there's different ways, but don't put them in here. Put them in on the starting, on the whoever implements it. In this case, it'll be the player. So with that, this needs to be of type craftable item names right here, the enum, and it needs to be an array. Let's drag that out. Let's get it. And anything that is within this array, we want to loop over. Okay. So for each loop, plug it into the completed right there. All right. And then with that, now we need to create a new function called discovered items. Hit the plus here. I'm going to call it discover item. And by creating a separate function here, we can call this. So whenever the player learns something, we just send an interface call to the player and say, hey, we just learned this. And then the player says, oh, okay, cool. Well, let me, update my crafting component and let it know that we just learned this item. So we need an input of this, and I'm going to call this input item name. I'm going to do craftable item names. And this is why I told you in a previous episode that it was good. You need to make sure that this item name, this is one of the many reasons, but this enum item names needs to match exactly the name given in the data table. All right. So this is one of the many reasons, but they have to match exactly, and make sure that when you create a new item in your data table that you also do update your item name list. Okay. Otherwise it's going to end up breaking and you're just not going to be able to find items here. So enum to string right there, enum to string. And then with that, I'm going to take the craftable item list. I'm going to add map add. Now, if you remember previously, I told you that a map has all the names are unique in there. The keys have to be unique. The values can change, but the keys have to be unique. So that's good for us because now what we're doing is we're taking this enum, converting it to a string. Now it's got to convert to a name. So a little bit of a step right there. So from the enum to string to a name, and then we're plugging it in there. It's finding this name in here. And when that name already exists, then it's going to give us the opportunity to override it. So now we're going to hit the check mark there. So if we're calling a discovered item, we don't need to run any other check. We're just going to tell it, change it to positive. All right. That's all we need to do. So go return, then head back out to the event graph, and in here, grab our discover item, throw it in the loop body. And the item we discovered is what's coming out of this array. All right. So with that, now you got that all saved up. Let's go ahead now and let's create some starting learned items. So let's go back to the your player character, and over here just select your crafting, and in here you'll see under defaults, I'm actually going to come back over here really quick, and I'm going to go starting learned items, and I'm going to give it a category of AC crafting. I need to make sure this craftable items, this needs to actually be private. Okay. We don't want anything else to mess with this other than this component itself. So we'll mark that as private. So here we go. We got the crafting selected. So if we come over here, AC crafting, we got our starting learned recipes. So if we hit the plus, we can come in here and we go, okay, we know red berry bread. So I'm going to start with that one right now. I'm going to compile it, and let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. Open up the tab here. and you can see we get nothing. Well, why do we get nothing? Well, that's pretty simple, actually. Let's head back out here to the crafting graph. If you remember, we created this crafting graph. Well, we're not actually calling that functionality. So let's go ahead and go primary HUD, update crafting window, plug that in. And the bench, I see I misspelled bench right there. You probably saw and were yelling at me. So let's just go ahead and plug in the bench. Grab that. I'll fix that in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and compile it now. We should be good to go. Hit play. Tab, and there we go. We got our food because we only know one item. The item's not populating here yet for some reason. I'm not sure why. We'll look at that in just a second. But yeah, so there's the category. That's ultimately we're working on the category. It should be populating the item. Let's back out of here and let me go debug and find out exactly why the item wasn't showing. All right, so there's a few issues that I found of why this wasn't quite working. Not too big of a deal. We'll get right into it and get it resolved. So let's head back into the crafting window. Now in here, we ran at the very beginning, update the categories. This is from the primary HUD. We update categories. And then in this, we come through, we get our categories, come here, we set a variable, and we checked is active. But if it's not the active, or if the active category is not equal to none, we still don't run off the false here. So we got to hook that up there as well. That doesn't directly resolve the issue we're having where the item wasn't being shown, but this is an error all the same that I ran into. So let's go ahead and fix that. Okay. And then another error that I found was the fact that, well, let's go ahead and resolve this first one. Let's get our item scene. The problem is we created this update category buttons here, and we're calling it, we created through the chain of events, we created this function update craftable items, and this will be called when we eventually click the button, but it's not being called right now. So if we come back out into the primary HUD and off this crafting window, we drag off and we go update craftable items. There we go. And we'll deal with this coming out when we do the info window, but we don't need it for now. So that should be good enough. Cross our fingers, save that and hit play. There is still another bug that we need to fix that I didn't correct, but let's hit play. And there we go. We get our item in here now. So now where the other problem comes in, let's come back over here. We only saw one item. Well, I have currently two items that can be discoverable. And in the player character, if you come up here to the starting learned items, if we add a second one and we turn this into our other item, the basic bandage, and compile that, now we hit play, you can see it still says food and we can't select it, right? So we can't switch between them. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. That is actually super easy. So open up your craftable category button blueprint, and in the event construct, I'm going to delete these other nodes here. We're just going to take our category text and let's set text, and the text we want to set it to is grab our category and to string enum. We want the enum to string, not the byte, and then plug it into the text and we'll get it converting it to a text. And there we go. So now that part of it should be updated and we're getting the text just fine. So the last thing we need to do now is if we select our button over here, come down here to on click, hit the plus, and I'm just going to move this up here. So now whenever the button's clicked, we actually want to call our event dispatcher, plug that in, and the button category is going to be the category we have saved right here. So there we go. We got that resolved. So now if we compile and save everything, everything should work as expected. So go ahead and hit the play. Come in here, open it up. There we go. We got the names populating correctly. And there we go. We can select between them. We haven't set up the functionality to show this yet, but that's it. No errors, no problems. So yeah, so we got that working there. All right. So one last thing I want to do before we wrap this up is let's go out here to our crafting slot. We created this throbber in here, as you can see. So let's go ahead and see that in action. So if we go back to the graph here and right at the beginning before we async, if we just go actually right here while it's completed, let's go in right here and just put in a delay and then give it whatever delay you want. I'll just go ahead and give it 1 second. That should be sufficient for our testing, and then compile it. Let's go ahead and hit play. Now when we open this up, you should see the throbber down on the window. There we go. We got 1 second of delay in there. So that's what's occurring while it's loading. So that's what you would get if it's having problems. If you got a whole bunch in here, some may load faster than others for whatever reason. You know how computers are, and there'll be a throbber in there, but it's not going to bind us up. It's not going to stop us from doing what we need to do in order to do this. So yeah, if there is something that you want to do after the or while this is currently loading, we can come in here and we can do this execution here. It's just going to run whatever's in this pin, and then as soon as it's done, it's going to jump down and do this completed pin right there. All right, and that's going to wrap it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this little mini series on populating our crafting window. Looking forward, we're going to work on our info box next. If you found this video and the others useful, please do me a favor, go down and hit that like button, subscribe while you're down there liking it, hit that notification bell to be updated whenever I upload a new video. And until the next one, peace.